This area had an abundance of fresh water, which is so crucial for agricultural society. Because in order to grow something, like Trish mentioned today, you need to have water. If you don't water anything, the plant is going to die. And we have a witness of that. This area was also praised by the prophets for its prosperity and sometimes mocked. What is that?
I was told monk open mouth and serve.
Well, that was actually a good introduction because we would have talked about a lot of these things in this sermon as well. So the prophets were praising the land of Bashan, and they were even mocking some of the prominent ladies of Bashan. Some prophets call them the cows of Bashan, or the fatted cows of Bashan, meaning that they were so prosperous that the thin cows were considered to be the representatives of the very poor, starved areas, and the fatted cows, they're very prosperous, they're very proud, they're very self-relying and not needing anything else in this world. This was also the very upscale place to live in, because you got everything around you. This is how the falls of Bashan look right now, and you can see how much greenery and how beautiful this area is. The waterfalls, the lakes, the hills and the valleys and everything is beautiful. Anybody would want to live there. This is one of the numerous lakes in the sort of a grotto of Bashan as well. You can see some swimmers in that imagery of the modern day times. So what other things would we know about this area? It was advantageous military position. We already mentioned Golan Heights. A lot of countries like Syria, Lebanon, Jordan are fighting over these positions because from those hills they can reach any place in Israel and attack Israel and have military advantage over Israel. That's why it was important to get a hold of this place and keep it under a certain control in order to either avoid or defend the land of Israel, or to attack it from the other point of view. Major trade routes were coming through this area as well. We know the Valley of the Kings that joined Africa with Europe. All the caravans of trade routes were coming through this area. So that means people controlling this area could tax every single caravan going through it and therefore make more money. Bashan was the source of the Jordan River. That's the only freshwater source for the entire stretch of the land of Israel. We know Jordan falls into Dead Sea, and Dead Sea has such a salty water, it's impossible to use it for any kind of irrigation or consumption or anything else. The only thing you can do with the salt water is extract salt from it, and that's it. And it is also an important trade. Mount Hermon was famous as the highest mountain in Israel. And in those days, people were boasting of their gods. And they were saying, oh, my God is the God of this mountain. And he is great because he is higher than your God. And your God only has this hill. Because the gods were always had some dedicated high places to them with altars where people were sacrificing animals or children or people to appease their idol or demon or god, as they call them, with a small g. So Mount Hermon, therefore, was one of those high places where 10 tribes of Israel built altars to their idols, and therefore they praised their mount. This is one of the fortresses located in the land of Bashan, and you can see that valley is about 3 miles, where you can see the entire area all the way around for 3 miles, 3 to 5 miles. And you can see approaching armies, approaching people, and you can control that area pretty well. This is one of the either remnants of the fortress or remnants of the high places, also with a nice overview of the area around. So let's recap. We are at Bethsaida, moving north to Caesarea Philippi, that was located near Dan, in the land of Bashan. And we learned a lot of positive things about this area. So what do we know of a negative connotation about this place. Well, first of all, this place is mentioned in Genesis 6, 1 through 2, where it says that sons of God were descending and taking the daughters of men and were creating some kind of a hybrid race of the giants. Therefore, this area was cursed from a long time ago, before Israel even occupied it. It was the area where Moses sent Israelite spies to get a report of the Canaan prior to conquest of the Promised Land. If you remember, Caleb and Joshua and 10 other representatives of Israel, they went out to spy out the land, and they brought grapes that 2 people needed to carry on the post. And they said, oh, no, we cannot conquer that land because they have fortified cities and they have giants there. And they called them the sons of Anakim or Rephaim or Nephilim. So they were so afraid by their size that they did not believe that God was able to lead them into the promised land and conquer these people. It was also a place where idolatry originated in Israel. And we know when 10 tribes of Israel separated from the 2 tribes of the south and decided to have their own worship center in Samaria and then in Dan, they decided that we will worship different kind of God because we don't want to pay tribute to the God of Benjamin and Judah over there in Jerusalem. We want to worship somebody else. And this area is also one of those areas today, even today on earth, where some demonic activities are happening or some unknown phenomena is happening. We know areas like Bermuda Triangle, Mount Fuji in Japan, and some of the other areas where strange things are happening and unexplained phenomena are happening. And if you watch Ancient Aliens, you will learn a little bit more about these places and things that are happening in these areas. We won't go too deep into that right now. And since we mentioned giants, well, these people come to mind. These are some big guys, you have to admit, right? These are some big guys. But I don't think that they're anywhere near the giants that we're mentioning in our sermon or that are mentioned in the Bible. These guys are just wannabes so far. If we look at the size comparison between these people, the smallest figure here is the average man of 6 foot high, or 6 foot tall, whichever way you want to go. And then the next 2 larger people at 12 feet, that's the size of Goliath mentioned in the Bible. The next to him, 18 foot, is the size of the king Og of Bashan. There was actually 2 capital cities in Bashan, was Ashtaroth and Og. And the king Og was one of the kings. His bed was 19 feet long, it says in the Bible. So he was 18 foot tall. But book of prophet Amos 2, chapter 2, verse 9, mentions 3 giants from the Rephaim, Nephilim, or Anakim. One was 24 feet high, one was 30 feet high, and one was 36 feet high. Okay, so, well, some of you might say, that sounds like a fairy tale. Show me some proofs. Okay. There's a little skull being excavated by a tiny excavator and a few little archaeologists. These are some images from the Smithsonian Museum of Science. You can't get more scientific than that. That's a government-supported institution. Maybe this is an anomaly. Okay, let's look at some other ones. There's an archaeologist standing next to a giant discovered in the Valley of Giants. That skeleton is at least 12 feet high or tall. These are some Mexican archaeologists, also Smithsonian Museum images. Tiny little skull found in the dig for a foundation of the building. There's 2 archaeologists decided to, excavate some teeth out of the skull of this little baby giant. There's some more. And I think that's pretty much enough, for us to realize that those things or those people existed. So let's just trust the Bible and not the scientists that are trying to hide that information from us for one reason or the other. So a place where all of the idol worship has originated and polluted the rest of the country. Remember we were talking about the yeast polluting the entire flour to create fluffy bread? Well, the same thing was with idolatry. The idolatry that originated in Dan polluted the entire Israel and even reached to Judah. That's why Israel was taken into exile, because in the exile of Babylonian and Assyrian empires, what they were doing to the Israelites, they were forcing them to worship the idols that they could worship freely in their own land. Because when you are forced to do something, what happens to you? You don't want to do it, right? If you want to do it because of your ambitions, oh, that's my will. But if somebody crosses my will and forces me to worship idols, oh, I don't want to do it. And guess what? That's how God cured Israel from idolatry. That's exactly why they needed to be exiled into a foreign land, to be forced to worship idols, so they will never, ever, ever worship idols again in their lifetime. So that's how God dealt with yeast of that evil in that time. So worshiping golden calf originated in this area, in the city of Dan. Worshiping Moloch, we learned about this god where children were placed in the red hot heated hands of this idol that was heated by wood and coals, and they were basically offered as a living sacrifice to this idol. Thousands and thousands of children were killed this way. Also, Baal worship was originated here. Baal also, as god of war and fertility, required human sacrifices. Goddess Astarte, after whom the capital city of Bashan was named, Ashtoreth, was also worshipped through human sacrifice and some obscene sexual activity. Now, you will say, well, this was happening in the Old Testament times. Probably this area has remedied itself and became better in the New Testament times. Well, let's see. Did it happen? Well, let's learn a little bit about Caesarea Philippi. This is the artistic recreation of how the city might have looked like in the time of Jesus. You see a lot of the Greek or Roman looking buildings. You can see a city wall, a lot of temples. This area was a cultic center of the Roman and Greek gods in the northern Israel. Numerous temples were built honoring God Zeus and God Pan and Jupiter and this god and that god, except for the God of Israel. So we learn from history that they've never learned anything. They continue to worship other gods because people are people and they don't change. What do we know about the locality of Caesarea Philippi? Well, we know that it had a flat rock face about 100 feet high and 500 feet long, and had a cave at the bottom with, as it seemed, bottomless pits filled with water. And the reason why they felt it was bottomless because they tried ropes lowering it down to the bottom of this pit, and they never could reach the bottom. So they assumed that it was probably the abyss or the entry into the underworld or hell. Hades and hell are used interchangeably through the Old New Testament. So therefore they thought it was the hell itself. In fact, they started throwing people down into that abyss, drowning them, thinking that these were sacrifices to Baal in the Old Testament and to Pan in the New Testament times. Later on, when the technology has become more sophisticated, they were able to measure the depth of the abyss, and it was almost 800 feet deep. However, due to some seismic activities and earthquakes and so on, and shifts in the soil, after one of the major earthquakes, a lot of rocks fell and blocked that entire well of water. So now the water kind of flows over the top of the rocks and to the outside of the cave.